Vulnerability is not weakness. It's only very strong people who can allow themselves to be vulnerable. And I think that's something that we miss a lot. And I don't see it as weakness. I think it takes a lot of courage and a lot of strength to stand up and say that. Hello, I'm Shankar.
And I'm Nikil. This is Try Across Generations.
Very excited to present our conversation with Abhijith Ravinutala, founder of MannMukti, a nonprofit organization dedicated to sharing stories about mental health among South Asian youth.
Yeah. So, Shankar, I think our listeners or viewers may have already noticed that the runtime on this episode is just a little bit longer than our usual conversations. And that's because this conversation was so interesting and so meaningful that we wanted you all to hear it in its entirety instead of chunking it up into parts. Abhijith shares his own personal journey in mental health, and I'm so grateful that he did. He went really deep with us and really opened up. And we also talk about his passion for exploring a modern version of Hinduism and his love of writing.
A quick note to our YouTube audience, since our episodes are now on YouTube, for those of you who'd like to see the conversation, now just this particular one, we started the video a few minutes into the discussion, so don't be alarmed if you don't see any video for the first part of the conversation.
We're definitely still picking up the YouTube thing. And for those who haven't, please check out our YouTube channel. It's new, and we're proud to be able to bring you video of these conversations. With this episode in particular, I think being able to see our faces adds a lot to the conversation. And especially in terms of how we exchange the stories and ideas around mental health, I think having that video really helps.
Absolutely. So let's dive in, and we'll come back at the end to wrap things up.
So we're welcoming a guest onto this episode of the podcast. We have Abhijith with us. We just want to give a little bit of an intro before we dive into the podcast. Abhijith was born in India and lived there for 6 years before he moved to Dallas, Texas. He founded and is the former CEO of the South Asian health organization MannMukti, which is still active today and strives to bring more awareness to mental health in our community. He got his bachelor's degrees in history and business honors at the University of Texas, Austin, as well as a master's in theology at Harvard, focusing on Hinduism. He is a futurist at work and a writer by passion. You can find his short stories published in places like the Southern Review, Glimmer Train Stories, the Chicago Tribute, and Jaggery Lit. So Abhijith, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's awesome to be here, and quick commendation to both of you for what you're doing. It's exactly the kind of conversations that we hope to create and bring about through founding MannMukti. So thanks for taking this forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for joining us. Shankar and I have had a lot of conversations about mental health earlier in the podcast, and when we learned about MannMukti and your story, we thought, hey, we have to talk to this person and learn a little bit more about your unique journey as well.
Yeah, excited to get into it, and I really liked some of the ways that you guys already talked about mental health as well. I appreciated that clock analogy and all the good stuff that was in there. I think you gave people a really good foundation for how to think about it.
Yeah, Shankar, that clock analogy, it's the gift that keeps on giving.
Well, I have to say, MannMukti is a fantastic choice for the name of an organization. It just encapsulates so many layers. I really love it. So congratulations to you for coming up with that and spearheading that whole effort.
So maybe, Abhijith, we'll start from the beginning, just to learn a little bit more about you. So we know that you grew up in India and you moved to the US when you were quite young. And so I'm just wondering, what was that like for you?
Yeah, so moved to sunny Dallas, Texas when I was 6 years old. I came over with my dad. My mom was already here for she'd come here with a job. Typical IT job. She's a software engineer. She remains a software engineer today. And yeah, it was living in like a suburb near the airport in Dallas, not many Indian people around. Definitely a big culture shock, I think, especially having grown up in a family that was pretty tight knit back in India, and I spent a lot of time with my grandparents, especially because my mom had me really young, so she popped me out, continued studying, like went on to do her master's and everything after that and start working. And so I spent a lot of my formative, like very early years, like going to elementary school and stuff, just with my dad, with my grandparents. Coming here and sort of being rooted away from all of that was definitely, I think, the biggest sort of culture shock. And I know my parents talk about how much I complained about like not having my grandparents around when I first came. So that was definitely a big thing. But I feel the rest is fairly standard stuff. High achieving spelling bee winner, expected to do well in math and science. Came up through good old Texas public schools, and at some point around high school, decided to go a little bit rogue and rebellious, and I was like, I want to be a history teacher. That's my goal in life. And I would say that's where really the unique path had started for me. And since then it's been quite a journey trying to figure out what that means of being a bit more off the beaten path, I would say.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Sorry, Shankar, go ahead. I think the next one's yours.
So first of all, Abhijit, what an interesting career choice, history, and I think so important, right? Because that's one thing. Living in this sort of rapid churn of technology, we forget. So I'm just curious. I just want to dig a little deeper. Why history?
Man, if I knew, if I had some idea, maybe. And sometimes I wonder, like, I would just go back and reverse these things. But no, I think, I don't know what it is, but there was some part of me that really clicked when I had my first really deep dive history class, like 10th grade, world history, AP world history. Had a really good teacher that really prided himself on connecting the things that we were talking about to the present day, to the politics of, or mid 2000s election seasons, to, things like economic crises, to sort of everything, and it made me feel like, this is something that really helps me understand not just where I come from, but where we're all coming from in terms of, what makes this world tick. And I think for me, it really resonated because it helped me feel like I could understand people better, understand like why we all are the way we are, why we do what we do. And since then, it's really been an important part of me. I wouldn't really necessarily say that I'm sticking to history as like the sort of driving passion of my life anymore. It's a different sort of variation of it. I eventually found history of religion was the most important thing. Eventually found history of Hinduism was the important thing, and then eventually found that finding a way to describe that history to people and make it relevant to today was really the important thing, the thing that I wanted to be good at, and the impact I wanted to leave. And I think impact is the other, probably. If understanding is one operative word, impact is probably the second operative word. I think I thought about history a lot because I probably at too early of an age, I thought about legacy a lot. Like, what sort of impact do I want to have with my life? What will remain after I also am history? And I think that I don't know, maybe that's just something about me, my nature, but that really drew me to the concept of studying it.
Wonderful. Yeah, I can completely resonate with this idea of, what makes people tick? Why do we think the way we think? Why we do the things the way we do, right? So maybe that's a good segue to our finding out what inspired you to start MannMukti.
Yeah. So MannMukti was really started because of the loss of a friend, to put it simply, right? When I moved to the U.S., which we first talked about, I moved to the small apartment complex outside the airport. There was one other Telugu kid there that became like my best friend, and he was 4 years older than me, so he was sort of a big brother to me. And I'm an only child, so it was important to have that, some sort of like sibling figure. I always wanted that. And we just became super close. We were best friends, despite the age gap. And we sort of went through the same schools together, hung out all the time. Our parents knew each other well. And it really wasn't until my friend went to college and started showing signs of mental illness that I ever really had any like, understanding or frankly exposure in a real personal sense to the darker side of mental health and what that means. And he had schizophrenic symptoms. He passed away as a result of some of his symptoms in about like fall of 2015. And basically I felt, having seen that happen, that even over the past couple of years before he passed, it felt like we were growing distant because he felt like he couldn't get through to me, or that I wasn't, maybe I wasn't there enough, maybe I wasn't understanding enough, maybe I just wasn't good enough friend. And so I think that there's always that wonder that I had, of that question I had of, what could I have done differently to be more supportive, and what could have gone differently if I had been. And I thought, if I can do something where this doesn't happen to other people, where they don't feel so alone, and people like myself who are loved ones of people going through something like this, well, maybe if we're better armed with the right knowledge, maybe we can make more of a difference. So yeah, set out to really do this towards that aim, and at least change the trajectory of one person's life if we could. I think I'm happy to say we've done a lot and had a good impact on a lot of, especially folks around the college age in our community, because we have a lot of university chapters around the nation. And yeah, I think we've played our small part in breaking down stigma.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's obviously a very personal story. It's a very moving story, and obviously brings up emotions from the past. And but it's really such a noble thing to sort of inspire you to do that for others. I can only sort of commend you for doing that. That's really impressive.
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think you mentioned legacy early on in this conversation, and what a way to honor the legacy of this person, right? To have an organization come out of it, and a lot of positive momentum on a topic that, as you know, Shankar and I feel is very important for our community to speak about a bit more.
Yeah.
I can kind of relate to where you're coming from too. I had a friend in college, a South Asian friend. I didn't know him that well, to be honest with you. He's a few years younger than me, but he unfortunately decided to take his own life. I think the pressure of school and academics really weighed on him. And I think about him often, especially when I hit certain checkpoints in my own life, milestones, and think about what could his life have been like, and could I have done something different? So I am just so inspired to hear you take that energy forward into something that's doing a lot of good in the world.
Yeah, thanks, man. Yeah, it's understandable. You always will have that little bit of curiosity in your head of what could have been different. But yeah, I mean, I think y'all are doing your great part in reducing that stigma as well, which is super important.
Yeah. I did want to ask you if you could talk a little bit about MannMukti, where it started and what it's grown into, and maybe what it might mean to our listeners, right, who are hearing about it for the first time or second time.
Yes, yeah. Let me do the spiel. So MannMukti translates roughly in the way we've talked about it to mental liberation. What we're truly trying to do more than anything else is increase awareness, reduce stigma, and encourage self-care when it comes to the topic of mental health in South Asian American communities. We started out mainly as I would say like a resource page, a website where I think that's only just one part of it. A resource page plus also a story platform, really. it was really I think what was revolutionary about it when we launched it was we had like, gosh, it must have been like somewhere between 15 and 30 stories written, like blogs written by people who had gone through their own journeys with mental illness in their communities, whether it was their own or whether they're talking about a parent who dealt with it and they wanted to sort of tell their parent's story in a way that they felt their parent couldn't. Just beautiful stories of resilience and just facing these sorts of things head on. And I think more than anything, we felt like storytelling was a way to help people see that this is a real problem within the community. This is not just happening to, the other types of Americans, other types of Western societies. This is us. This is happening to us. And so we need to do something about it. And I think from there, it really transformed into just ways of how can we continue spreading some sort of actions after that awareness was initiated. So, we started with just the website, the storytelling platform. We started a podcast around that time as well, and then grew into having in-person university chapters open throughout the country. And that's something that we were thankfully funded by an organization out of Chicago named Ignite Asha, that's doing a lot of great work raising funds for charitable causes like ours. And thanks to them, we were able to open some university chapters, fund them. And I would say that's one of the main focuses of the organization now, is to help people have conversations around that age of college, when you're really taken away from all these things that have grounded you over the past 18 years. And, having to sort of deal with your individuality in that sense. And I would like to think it's going well. It's growing, and I'm at this point now where I'm really just a board member and interfacing with the CEO when I can. But it's wonderful to see how the organization is continuing.
That's wonderful. Did you say 30 chapters at schools?
So no, it's a little bit closer to a little bit closer to 20 chapters.
Okay.
It fluctuates based on like it's college, right?
Yeah.
So the kids are still college.
Right. It's got to turn over every 4 years.
Yeah.
That's amazing. What a great time to reach those people, especially given some of the stories we were sharing about folks from our past too. How did you, okay, this is a question I've been wanting to ask you. We've all heard Shankar's famous clock analogy, and just thinking about mental health in different ways, right? I bet you have a bit of a unique perspective given all the work you've done here. So when you started out, how do you think the South Asian community viewed mental health, and where do you think we are today?
Yeah. I think when I started out, mental health was always synonymous with mental illness. And talking about it in any way was sort of an acknowledgement or an admittance of something is wrong. In something is wrong that we need to be ashamed of, right? I think over time, I'd like to think that we have started to move towards a more wellness mindset around it. People understand that mental health doesn't just mean the illness of going through depression or anxiety or psychotic personality disorders. Mental health can also mean stress, right? It can also mean sort of the daily day-to-day things that we manage with our emotional well-being. And I think I'd like to think that's taking off and people are realizing that. I don't necessarily think we're at a place where we're entirely comfortable with accepting or talking very openly about the illness side of it, when we do have depression or etc. But I'd like to think that we're more comfortable talking about the many ways that it can manifest. I don't know. Do you guys agree? What do you think?
Yeah, I think I completely agree. I think growing up and also my interactions here, I've always felt that it's an admission of weakness if somebody has a mental health, conversation, it's typically, oh gosh, there's a sign of weakness. Maybe there's something wrong in the family. And I think, as I mentioned in one of our podcasts, that stigma also comes from the fact that, at least the India that I grew up in, the arranged marriage was a big deal. And so any hint of some genetically transmissible, even though many mental health issues are not genetic, but if there was even a hint of that, then I think it would cast such a blot on the whole family that people are very reluctant to admit to it. And then for other reasons here, I mean, nobody wants to appear weak, but I think you're right. I think there has been a shift. I still think it's not enough, honestly. I think much more needs to be done. And I just wanted to also throw out that two things that came to my mind when you're talking about MannMukti is, one is I've been watching some videos by this Med Circle group. I don't know if you know of their
No.
work. So on YouTube, they post a lot of informational videos about personality disorders and
Okay.
stuff like that. So I think that's one thing I was thinking of. And the other thing I was thinking of is the caregivers and the loved ones. So not only the ones who are going through the challenges of, say, stabilizing their mental wellness, but I think having resources and forums and support for caregivers or loved ones is really vital, because I think that they can also go through a lot, you know, uh, as they're caring and sort of in the presence and interacting with someone who's struggling. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say, I think you're right. There's been such a shift in awareness. And one thing I've been reflecting on is therapy, right? And the stigma around therapy that still exists. I think it's getting better, but it certainly is still there in some ways. And Shankar and I talk about this from time to time. So Shankar and I are working towards becoming coaches, professional coaches.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because I can think of many people in our community who would not go to therapy, but who would go to coaching. And they are a little bit different for sure. One deals with trauma a lot more than the other, but just I don't need this, the illness part of it, the connotation of illness, if you were to go to a therapist,
Yeah.
is so fascinating and kind of infuriating to me when I think about it.
Yeah, I picked up on that in one of your earlier episodes when you mentioned that people are led to therapy when they're coming with a trauma mindset, and they're led to coaching when they come with a growth mindset. That was really interesting to me because I hadn't heard it articulated in that way before. Yeah, it's I think that's definitely still. So yeah, when I was saying earlier about I think we're still not quite there when it comes to the actual illness being manifest. Yeah, the part of that is we still don't want to talk about the fact that we're seeking help for things, and a lot of that is definitely the strength mindset that Shankar was talking about. I think a lot of it boils down to, man, we're so scared to show fragility or weakness, as it not that being mentally ill in any way is a sign of fragility or weakness, but we all perceive it to be within the community that has stigmatized it to be so. And so we don't if somebody breaks their arm, we're not like, oh, what a weak guy. It's like, oh, that's unfortunate that happened to you. But something happens to someone's mind, it's like, oh, he's so weak. And that's unfortunate. And seeking help for that, again, same thing. If you go to a doctor when you break your arm, nobody's like, wow, why didn't you just rest it and put it back in place yourself? Nobody says that, but they do say it all the time if you're mentally ill.
Yeah. And actually, I wanted to maybe touch on a more personal thing. We talked a little bit about how, the South Asian community as a whole views it. But what has your experience been talking about mental health? Let's say your own family and friends.
Yeah, let's get into it. I'm dealing with this hardcore over the past few weeks, really since the time I first had an intro chat with Nikil. So if I'm going to apologize in advance if I get a little emotional, but I'm happy to talk about it. Yeah. it's still really tough to talk about it. Whether it's family that are older generation, or even whether it's friends in my own generation, I don't find the experience to be that much better in my current generation. I would say that my generation has picked up a lot of attitudes around the idea of strength and resilience, that, you know, older generations have done a great job of teaching us. I think they've picked it up and turned it into a mind frame of what you could term today as something like toxic positivity. You are dealing with something like depression. Don't worry about it. We all go through sadness. Like, you're gonna be fine. Hey, it's fine. These are the ups and downs of life. You're totally gonna get through this, man. Like, I believe in you. Okay, that's nice. But I could fucking think about that myself, you know? Like, when
Right.
when and you know, I'm dealing with this because I've had depressive episodes for the past, you know, over a year and a half. They've become really bad in the past year, let's say, and really acute in just the last month or two, since I last talked to Nikil. And so I'm hearing these things and talking with family and friends frequently. I started going to therapy recently. And when I talk to my therapist about some of my experiences talking to friends and receiving some of this, you know, mindset of, it's fine, you're going to get through it, not a big deal. I had internalized this feeling of wondering, am I susceptible to something like depression because I am weak? And somebody else who's telling me that it's okay, I'm going to get through it, they're just mentally stronger than me. And that, you know, I genuinely thought that. I believed that in my heart. And something the therapist helped me realize was, when we go through things like this, they manifest in so many different ways. I'm somebody who's always been super duper emotional and sensitive. So when I go through something like this, I really feel it for what it is. It's sadness. It's curling up in a fetal position and crying until I just feel like I can't cry anymore. I've had those moments very recently. And I'm able to like go through that emotion as it's sort of, in whatever way it's like sort of coming into me, it feels like I'm receiving it exactly at that point, and like letting it manifest in me as sadness and dealing with it as sadness and letting that flow, and hopefully coming out of it the next day. There's many people who receive those sorts of negative emotions, the depression, and they immediately run away because they're not quite comfortable dealing with the emotion of it. Maybe they're just not super emotional people. They're not comfortable even looking inside and figuring out what that emotion means. And my therapist is a family and marriage therapist. And she was saying that, you know, you can go through it as sadness now and, you know, figure it out and, you know, learn, or it can result in your marriage breaking apart 20 years from now because you've stifled so many things for so long. And so I think in our community, there's a lot of people who would do the latter, stifle things, run away from them, and turn to other ways of coping that are not healthy, but are seen as not depression. India has, I think, some of the lowest rates of people taking antidepressants in the world. But I'd like to know what the numbers are for how many alcoholics we have. I'd like to know what the numbers are for how many people we have who beat their family, their children, or their wives. I'd like to know what the numbers are for how many people are just worrying and anxious all the time, right? These things manifest in so many different ways within us as people. And when somebody is just going through it in the way that I am, it's hard for people who don't go through it the same way as me to understand. That was a lot, but hopefully that answers the question and says a little bit of how I'm feeling these days.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. That was everything and more. And I just so commend you for being open about it. And in the spirit of transparency as well, I've been going to therapy for 5 years now, following a very tough stretch in my life personally. And when I heard you speak, what I was just thinking is therapy is strength, right? Like you are deciding to get some assistance from a professional on something that will help you, like you said, for 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 years. Like we go to doctors for the same thing physically. I don't see much of a difference at all. So I just hope, I consider your story and what you just shared as a strength. And I'm just very moved at the moment. Shankar, what about you?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say I commend you for your vulnerability, because vulnerability is courage, actually. So, in fact, we first frame that fear of, um, talking about mental well-being or mental health or mental illness. It's typically framed as a weakness, but actually, vulnerability is not weakness. It's only very strong people who can allow themselves to be vulnerable. And I think that's something that we miss a lot. And I don't see it as weakness. I think it takes a lot of courage and a lot of strength to stand up and say that. And I really loved your framing of that toxic positivity, because that's really living in denial of at least 50% of our life, right?
Yeah.
And I think in my own personal experience, and also through the coaching that I do, I always try to encourage my clients and people who come and consult with me that it's actually by looking into the negative uh, that we can reframe and actually energize that into the positive. Kind of like what you did with your experience with your friend. Uh, it was a very deep, dark, difficult thing, but you managed to look into it, and that's what made. You could have just shut it out and denied it, but that wouldn't have helped at all. So I think the path to healing is through the um, darkest attics and recesses of our mind.
Yeah.
But that's when really true healing happens, and
Yeah.
shutting it out, like you said, is just. The other thing I wanted to touch upon is this business of, when they say deal with it. So my experience with negative aspects of mental health, depression, etc., is that um, it's a myth that we think we are in control of our mind. It's a myth that we think we can be in control of everything. There are things that happen to us in our mind that overwhelm us. It's
Yeah.
like a tsunami. It's like a wave that has a strength that is beyond you. And I think it's probably such a great hubris for us as humans to think that we can control the mind, or that everything is completely under control. And I think shattering that early on in life is a good thing. You know, I think it's the path to growth. It's the path to real empowerment, right?
Yeah.
And so, uh, yeah, I'm completely with you on that. I think that's, it hurts when that kind of stuff is trotted out to someone who's actually dealing with that tsunami. Right?
Can I do you mind if I expand on that a little bit?
Please.
Um and again, sort of circling back to the original question about it. Um, I haven't been feeling, it's generally like one day a week, I feel like, where I'm just like, I feel like shit. Um, Today is that week. Today is that day of this week. And ironic that we're doing this today, but hopefully helpful and brings out a lot of truths out of me. But I was feeling low, just sort of all day. And since having like a bigger breakdown a few weeks ago, I told my parents about therapy. I told them how bad I'm feeling, and they initially were like, why are you feeling so low? Do you know this person has this disease and this person is doing this thing? And they're all like getting through it. And I was like, yes, like, I don't know what you want from me. Like, like, I don't want to, I don't want to like discount anyone else's struggles. That's not what this is about. Obviously, like, we're all, everybody has their ups and downs and they're dealing with things, and, maybe they're processing in very different ways than me, but this is my struggle, right? And this is what I'm dealing with. And when I said it with enough gusto and tears and yelling in my voice, I think my parents, really understood, and they're okay, something is genuinely like very differently wrong, and we need to change the way that we're talking to me, because I told them to change the way they're talking to me. And but I have a really good relationship with my parents, and I have to say that people who come at it from the angle of like, be grateful for what you have, it's okay, like, there's no reason for you to be sad about things, like, you're not struggling to live, you're not struggling to be healthy or anything like that. It all comes from a really good place. I can't deny that. It's positivity for a reason, right? Even if it's toxic positivity, they're trying to help genuinely, I think. And I I'm not really mad at anybody for doing that. I think it's it's such a different feeling that I've had, though, dealing with what I'm dealing with now. And I think when I was running MannMukti and stuff, it talked about mental health a lot, but I had dealt with like some, body dysmorphia issues early on in life, but like it was fleeting, and it was not like super severe. I would say recently is the first time where I've really felt like what depression is truly like, and that is such a goddamn hard thing to describe and talk about. It's not like the sadness that people think it is. People think it is when they say like, oh, like, I've been sad too. Like, it's okay. There's a despair to it that feels like you're never going to get out of it. And what's the point of anything? And that's a terrible feeling. And I think I just want to say that if people are hearing this and thinking about supporting others who are going through something like what I'm going through, you may think what like sadness is because you've had grief at some point. You've had acute reaction, emotional sadness reaction to something particular that happened, an event in time. But to feel the despair is an entirely different animal, and we have to be better about talking about it, I think.
Yeah. Thank you. That's so deep, so profound, so vulnerable and courageous, as Shankar so rightly pointed out. Yeah, I think what you shared is such a optimistic in some ways, and just a very understanding view of other people, responding to you in ways that are less than kind. But like, I just also want to say how much hubris has to go into the thinking of like that I would know what you need, right? Or that even if you and I are good friends, or like Shankar comes to me and says something similar, for me to then say, Shankar, it's fine. Don't worry about it. Did you hear about this other story? That was crazy, right? You got nothing to worry about. Like, it is so presumptuous. It is like inexcusable. We don't know what anyone else is going through, really, even your close friends and family. And also, is that person looking for advice, or is they just looking to be heard? I think we assume so much in our community that like, oh, Abhijith, if you come to me and tell me you're feeling sad, that you're looking for me to fix your problem. I don't think you are. You're just like wanting someone to hear you. And I if we can make those two shifts as a community, in terms of just like realizing we know almost nothing about even the people we really love, and that most people are not looking for advice, or if they are, like, wait for them to ask you for advice, I think we could be much better allies to each other on mental health.
I lost my train of thought before. Let me just quickly get out the fact that Shankar mentioned the idea of control earlier. That's what I wanted to say about when people talk about these things in that way of trying to normalize them. So today I was having a bad day. I told my parents like, they were like, how are you doing? And I was like, today's a low day. I'm not feeling that great. And my mom immediately shifts into control mode, right? Which that's just how she is. That's how she like deals with things. So it's, oh, what is wrong? Did something happen at work? Was it this? Was it that? Was it that? And there's like, so many different reasons that she tries to come up with. And every time I'm just like, I don't know. I wish I knew, because if I did, I would do something about it. But I just genuinely don't feel like I have control over these thoughts and, these feelings. And that's just something I have to try and cope with and deal with. Anyway, I want to just get that point across.
Thanks, Abhi. To respond a little bit to what you said, Nikhil, um, I think I'm in a slightly unique position because I'm a parent, and I can
Yes.
give you a little perspective on that. Um, I think the long history of caring for someone from a very young age for your child, and being able to take care of all their physical needs sometimes imprints on us as parents, um, as though we have some sort of superpower to take care of our children. So if you graze your knee, you come running to me. I am your all at that point, right? So I jump in, I apply the antiseptic, I bandage you, I kiss it, and it's okay. And you're I think the mistake that happens when we do parenting like that over the years is that we assume we can do the same thing at the emotional level and the mental level and all that.
Yeah.
And so there are two modules that are turned to max. One is always care and fix it, right? Because you're supposed to do this. And B, because I could do it in the physical, I must be able to do it in everything else, right? So as parents, we have to learn to program ourselves from both those things. That one is, we are only stewards for a short while of your care, and as you grow older, we have to dial down all kinds of care and become more like friends. And I think that shift it's hard even for the most self-aware parents to cultivate constantly, and it is easy to fall into the trap of a wanting to fix and feeling that you have a special uh, obligation and gift to fix your child's problems. So I'm just sharing that from a personal perspective that might help. I'm not saying it's right, but it does happen.
Right.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Shankar. It does speak to the enormous and awesome responsibility of being a parent, right? And being everything to that child growing up. There's something I wanted to test with both of you, like Abhijit, from what you were talking about with your parents this week, and Shankar as a parent. So what I'm trying to figure out is, um, generationally, how to improve this conversation. And to me, in my stage of life, not as a parent, full disclosure, um, if someone comes to me with anything, even my best friend or whoever, um, I know that they are the stewards of their own journey, right? Like, the most I can do is try to play a role on the way. I have minimal answers for them, probably. I might have some ideas that help them. And so, therefore, if they share something really intense, I can't assume I have the answer, but I can try to listen and maybe offer something if it's helpful. So then, how do we help our community make that shift, and especially parents, right? Because I think there's this feeling of parents wanting to fix, wanting to help, wanting to cure. And it's not just parents, I mean, to your point, even in our own generation, there's like, oh, the toxic positivity piece of this. But how do we make that jump?
Good question. Shankar, you want to go first?
Sure. I can share a little bit because I was trying to help a friend with their situation in their family. And I approached it with, I would say, as much of all the, good qualities that you mentioned, a sensible way, not trying to be too intrusive, trying to just hold the space, hold the conversation. And sometimes what can happen with that is you're just not able to keep the communication going any longer, right? And the peculiar thing about parents is they will always be involved and they never give up, right? For the most part, right? So there's this delicate balance between involvement and having respect for the other person's autonomy, their self determination, and all that stuff. Like sometimes when people need help, my immediate instinct is to always um, defer to their autonomy and to their self determination. I would never want to push them into doing anything that they shouldn't do. But I do question myself in cases where, for instance, I've lost that connection or whatever communication. I just couldn't. Is would somebody who jumped in both feet, sat on their head, would they do better? I don't know. I mean, I have to question myself whether the the premise of which I think is a good one, of deferring to that person's autonomy and self-determination, is also bordering on the side where your involvement starts to peter out. But with parents, that biochemical coding is so strong they cannot let that peter out. And so, maybe you call it love, maybe you call it blind love, maybe you call it whatever. But sometimes I think they have the power to pull people back from the brink when all the professionals fail. At least I hope so.
Mhm.
I don't know. Just throwing that out there.
I'd like to think so too. I think you mentioned it in an earlier podcast as well, just the idea of how nuclear our families are versus how they used to be. And I think it makes a lot of sense. It's well documented that loneliness is a big cause of a lot of mental health issues. And I think in a culture that is more collectivist, yeah, grief is grief, sadness. These things are all anger. These things are all shared a bit more. They feel lighter, I feel like, when we're around people who are willing to like live in those emotions with us. Not that it always works out in a way that everybody is like very emotionally aware. That's not the case in our in our society, but I think that's the ideal case scenario.
Yeah, I agree. And so this idea of how do you maintain maximum involvement while, and there's a coaching thing that Nikhil will resonate with, but still always keep the focus on the individual and allow them to be set their agenda, so to speak, right? That's a challenge, wouldn't you say, Nikhil, in coaching as well?
Yeah, I think so. And, I'm just reflecting too on some of the stories Abhijit you were sharing, and just to open up myself. Um, Back in high school, my junior year of high school, I had a really tough year. Um, it was a lot of pressure and different things that didn't go my way, but I think it was the way I was kind of internalizing it. And I think looking back, I probably was depressed during parts, if not most of that year. And to your point about despair, I hit a point that year where I understood why people take their own lives.
Yeah.
It made sense to me. I didn't act on it. I wasn't planning to act on it, but it was just like, I just feel so bad right now that it makes sense why people consider this.
Sorry you felt that, man.
Yeah, thank you. Um, and I'm sorry, for some of what you're experiencing these days too. And also thank you for coming on. Uh, Also on a day where, you might not have been feeling as well.
It's all good.
Um, and yeah, I guess I just wanted to share that, to say this is, I don't know, it's not just like one person. If people are listening to this podcast and thinking, oh, this is just one person of its story, it's not. I can relate to parts of what you're saying. And even in recent months have been feeling, I think there's something about aging and growing up too, where, things that used to slide off don't slide off in the same way. Like I'm getting better at some things, handling some situations, but other situations, not as much. As an example, last week I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about how, as you grow up, the losses get higher in your life, the losses get bigger. And this person talked about, someday you have to bury your parents. And I heard that and I just started crying.
Yeah.
And, just it got emotional thinking
Yeah.
about it, of of that. And my parents are still relatively young, but it got me emotional. I sat down to meditate because that's usually what I do to calm myself. I started meditating, and then I just started crying even more. I couldn't control, something needed to come out. And once it did, and I was actually able to share that story with my parents, and it brought us a little bit closer together. But just to say, our emotions play in all kinds of ways. And the idea that we are the master of our minds, as we've kind of talked about so far, is not always the case, might not even be the case half the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I really like the point also that Abhijit brought up about loneliness. I was just reading in the New York Times today. I think Nicholas Kristof has an article on loneliness and how some countries now have a minister of loneliness. Although I think it would be nice if they flipped it the other way and said a minister of social connection or something.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Right? But yeah, what you say is so true. I've been listening to a lot more, also, studies on what happens when we are very alone and what happens when we don't connect with people. And a lot of what you say, Abhijit, makes total sense. We also tend to, I think, revolve our own thoughts around so much that they make our thinking more somehow concrete and rigid. Whereas the more you meet, you get another perspective. It triggers a whole different set of connections. And yeah, there's even, I think, fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging studies of what happens to the brain, when it's very lonely and stuff like that.
Wow.
So, yeah. But at the same time, this is what we live in today, right? This is how we live. So we have to accept that. And so I think Nikil raised a good point, which is, does the older generation always think that all the kids are depressed these days, right? Or is it just that we're pulling the curtain back? And I think it's that. I honestly think we're just acknowledging this more openly, whereas in the past, what I feel happened was that it was just passed on as generational trauma. Like you were saying, yes, you could share emotions, but some of those things were completely unacceptable. And they were sort of normalized and moved on, right? Yeah. I mean, Uncle so-and-so is just crazy. He just comes and loses his top and throws things all over the house, and that's okay, right?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So not okay.
Anger is so much more normalized in the way we used to deal with things, as this is a healthy way to. This is just a healthy way to. Our men are just angry. Why are they angry? Maybe they're depressed. Like, it doesn't come from nowhere. Our men are just drinking a lot. Well, why? I think, yeah. I think, at least for me, in conversations I've had with my family about what we deal with in the current, our current generation, it's an age where also, the choices that have been made by the immigrant generation, I think, are reverberating into almost like an extension of that loneliness. They left their home countries for to chase opportunity, and gave us that opportunity, and succeeded, like check. Most of us feel the need to then turn around and say, okay, I'm going to do the best I can do, go to the best schools, get the best jobs, etc. Right? That this is the opportunity that we came here for. Especially if you're somebody who remembers leaving, like I do. When you go do those things, it necessarily often takes you away from family. The best schools in the world are not in Dallas, Texas, right? There's some great ones, but that wasn't enough, right? In my mindset of like, whatever I was thinking. So I had to go out. I had to go elsewhere. I had to necessarily root myself away from my family. So the same things that they did are then like sort of extending and compounding in these ways that create loneliness for us. I create a little bit of disconnectedness compared to what our parents grew up with, or just older generation in general, like living in India, in South Asia. And I think it's very hard to compare apples to apples in that sense. So when people think, oh, this younger generation is just depressed all the time, no, it's like we don't have the same environment that you do. Obviously we're dealing with different things. Many of the older generation was trying to survive, trying to, get financially secure, things like that. But I think a lot of it is just environment, individualism versus collectivism, emotional awareness versus stifling. And sometimes it just comes into vocabulary. We just have the vocabulary sometimes to say, I'm depressed, versus, I'm pissed and I want to go hit somebody.
I like what you raised. It opened my eyes that the next generation is being made to run on a faster hamster wheel almost. And the fact that by if parents push their children towards higher levels of achievement, that often results in overwork and more loneliness, even compared to our generation, which already is in some sense less connected to family than when we were back in India. I think that's very perceptive. I mean, when I hear of some of my friends' children working, either in the medical field, 70 hours a week or something like that, or at a top-notch consultancy, the first thing I think about is, my God, that must be so hard. And is that really helping this person at this stage? I mean, sorry, maybe I'm just a slacker and, lazy, but it seems to me that at what cost, right? I mean, what about the richness of human connection? On the other hand, if your kid comes back for a summer and just decides to spend time with you, like, isn't that also a gift? If they're not running off and doing something like the next most fantastic thing to post on social media, right?
Yeah.
But just having a quiet summer with you, okay. I think that's a gift. I think it's precious and it gives you a chance to bond. But yeah, I think we really need to rethink what human connection means, and I really appreciate that. The other thing I wanted to raise was how gendered this is, and you kind of touched on it, Abhijit, when you said about men can yell, and of course, I'm not nowhere qualified to speak about this from the other perspective, but at least I'm aware that it is very gendered. And we need to, growing up, I'll give you my very limited perspective. The women are always expected to be more forgiving, more patient, more whatnot. And it seems a bit unfair and unrealistic, quite honestly. I mean, I think it should be born equally. Look, I think it's nice when a guy is also more patient and more forgiving and softer and quieter. Yeah. So that's just my very limited perspective. I think there's many angles to this, but just want to throw that out there.
Yeah. I really like the points you both have made about what we accept, what each generation accepted in terms of, in this case, let's say male behavior of anger and alcoholism and whatever else. And those are maybe symptoms of a deeper root cause that, with a greater focus on mental health, those people may reach different outcomes. And we have an opportunity in this generation and future generations to maybe stymie that, or to stop it from getting to that level. I was also just thinking about how, here's a perspective I've been having recently. Oftentimes our strengths and our weaknesses are opposite sides of the same coin, right? And I wonder if some of that helps us to come to a more tender understanding of where we are with mental health. So Abhijith, for example, this idea you mentioned, you are sensitive and you feel things very acutely. I relate to that as well. I would put myself in that same bucket. But I think just hearing your story, I think some of that stuff has helped you do some of the amazing things you've done, right? If you didn't feel that way, I wonder if MannMukti would be around today. I'm not sure it would, right? Yeah.
Right.
What an amazing gift. Like, genuinely, you gave this world a gift based on how you felt, what you felt, and what you did with it. And I was reflecting on a professional experience I had years ago where I heard from my boss at one point, oh, I think you're a little too sensitive around this client.
Yeah.
And
Been
so
there.
me as a young professional, I was like, all right, fine, I'll be hard. I'll crack the whip. I'm not going to be smiling too much in calls. Like, you'll get taskmaster me. And I did it for a few weeks. It was fine. I guess we got some results, but it felt awful to me. And
Yeah.
I wasn't giving my gifts right to the client. And I think they saw that. So for me, the journey I've been on is trying to accept that the same things that make me, when I'm not in my good moments, that I feel, those are actually the same things that show up in the great moments and that make me me. And I'm just curious what you both might think about that.
Um, it's a beautiful perspective. I think you're absolutely right. I think I joked earlier that if I knew what it was that got me interested in some of the things I'm interested in, like the liberal arts, the humanities, and all this stuff, then I would maybe go back and try and re-engineer that parts of myself. But no, I never would. Um, I I think I really resonated with what you said earlier about listening to that podcast and tearing up about what you were hearing. Man, like the amount of times that I cry just watching like TV episodes or movies of stuff. And oftentimes my wife is like, man, like, are you good? She's like generally there to like wipe my tears and be like, it's okay, it's a movie. And I'm like, I know, it's totally fine. Like, this is just cathartic for me. And I'm just like, I don't know, like I just really feel things in that way. Like I'll just be in movie theaters like bawling at Bollywood movies, like um it's silly, right? It's sort of silly in like a when you compare it to the norm, but yeah, I love that part about me. And you mentioned it at the onset. I want to be a writer. I want to be a fiction writer. Um, Fiction is really just trying to do your utmost to put your soul in the soul of somebody else and feel their feelings and empathize with them to the extent that you can tell their story, right? It's a draining, very tough, like tough thing to do, but it's a beautiful thing, and I love the fact that I'm able to access that because of who I am. Are all fiction writers like this? I don't know, probably not, but I know that's what makes me tick. Is the ability to do that and to engage with those things. This is slightly unrelated, but I just want to bring it up. Just I feel like you guys will both resonate with this, and if you haven't seen it, hopefully you'll go out and see it. One of the movies that has made me cry like a baby in a theater is a movie called The Farewell. Have either of you seen
Yes.
that?
That's the one with Aquafina?
Yeah,
Oh
yeah.
yeah, I've seen that. Yeah. Have you
Um,
seen it, Chunker?
No, no.
Really quickly, Shankar, it's a really gorgeous movie about somebody, a Chinese American, growing up here. She's close with her grandma. Regular phone calls back to China, and they find out that the grandma is really sick and she doesn't have long to live. And the entire family knows this because the grandma's sister tells them, but they hide that information about her sickness from the grandma herself. And so the entire family plans a wedding. They get somebody in the family married off quickly so that they have an excuse to go visit her and spend all the money to go there without her questioning them. And there's a scene from that movie that I think about a lot. And the American protagonist is fighting with her family the whole time she's in China. She's like, this is ridiculous. We have to tell her that she's sick. Like, we can't just let her live without knowing. And her uncle says, that is a very American mindset of you to have. It's okay in your mindset to let her deal with the fact that she's sick and have to deal with all of like the emotional toll of that. In our way of thinking, we take that burden from her and we do it on her behalf. And I just think about that a lot as like a really beautiful like illustration of collectivism versus individualism, and just how humans share emotions. But yeah, just wanted to plug that movie and say everybody should watch it.
Thank you. No, certainly sounds. I think I read about it, but I haven't watched it. So now let me have to. Um, Nikhil, you brought up a very good point, and I wanted to uh, talk a little bit about one of Abhijit's other gifts, which is really intriguing to me and very close to my heart, is that you'd mentioned that your life goal is to create or understand a modern version of Hinduism.
Yes, correct.
And that's very close to my heart. So tell us more about that.
Yeah. So I think if there's a thread to draw through all of this stuff that I've been talking about today, it's definitely a thread of storytelling and wanting to, help people empathize with things, help people see what I'm seeing when it comes to like emotions or just stories and human connection. Like I said at the very beginning, that initial history class got me on a path towards understanding all of these things. Eventually realized that religious history, the history of India's religions, was the thing that resonated with me the most. You can definitely draw it to the fact that came here, left there, and wanted to feel somehow more connected to that. Feel connected to it in a way that felt like it was in my heart and my bones and like the way I live my life. And so I went to study Hinduism in grad school, and my goal was, get a master's, get a PhD, be a professor, teach other college kids how to think about Hinduism and, live that life, especially because I love academia. Basically 1 year into academia, I was like, oh, this is not what I thought it was. And specifically the practice of studying Hinduism in the Western academy is a difficult one if you're not white male. I won't even say male. It's not super gendered in that sense. Of course, it is in other ways, but yeah, if you're, and the best way I can illustrate it is to say that I was in a class about many different iterations of the Mahabharata and Ramayana across South and Southeast Asia, and we had to write a final paper. And I had one other Hindu person in the class with me, and everybody else was non-Hindu. And the other Hindu person in class went up to the TA once and said, I need some help, figuring out how to finish this paper and like get a good thesis. And the TA said, if you're going to do a good job on this paper, you need to pretend that you're not Hindu. Which is just the most ridiculous fucking thing I've ever heard.
Wow.
And so I think that in a nutshell is what's wrong with studying Hinduism in Western academy. That's why I couldn't do it. I felt like I wanted to study it as an insider, studying my own religion, putting my own, thoughts and soul into it. And I wanted to think and write about things in a way that I felt like my mother could pick up and read. Somebody else would, anybody would just be able to pick up and read casually, not have to go through a 600-page dissertation to like figure out what I'm trying to say. And so that became my driving goal after I left. I finished the master's and left. And instead of academic writing, I thought creative writing is my path. And the goal is to tell stories about Hinduism that either take from existing myths and put them in a modern light, or illustrate some part of some truth that exists in one of our stories and illustrate it through modern day. But in essence, it's everything that I'm writing about is people dealing with moving in and out of faith in the modern world through the lens of Hinduism, through the lens of specifically our Hindu stories, our Indian stories, which are one of the oldest and some of the best storytelling traditions in the world. And I hope to start there. I have a short story collection I've finished. I'm trying to get it published. I have a novel I'm working on. And the goal is, start with fiction, one day write nonfiction about how I think about Hinduism. And honestly, this is just a small seed of an idea, but one day open a very different kind of temple in the US that caters to a very different way of thinking about Hinduism and practicing it, following the footsteps of other religions who I think have done a really good job of adapting themselves to the West and to modern life. That's what I would say to intro it, at least.
I love it. That is so wonderful. But first of all, I completely agree with you in the sense that in Western academia, we talk about these ethic and emic perspectives, like the insider and outsider. And I think that's the most horrendous and horrifying thing is to tell somebody that you need to strip your identity off in the name of being objective
Yeah.
somehow.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's grotesque, but it is still very prevalent. I
Yeah.
mean, I have railed long against this, both personally and I felt that uh, when I was a kid, I read Paul Deussen, who has translated the Upanishads into English, and the sort of condescending nature with which they approached this work, like, oh, there's really nothing in this Upanishad, you know. I'm like, okay, and these are people who are published and they read. I mean, this is probably in the Harvard Oriental series or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And all this was okay. It was it was just this extremely condescending colonial imperialist viewpoint that here's some sort of a tribal society and we're learning about their writings and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that the legacy of that has still still persists, and there are guys like this guy Rajiv Malhotra, I think if I remember his name right, is one guy who's trying to push back a lot against that,
Mhm.
against Western academics. Not only so, that's one thing. It's transformed into a slightly different view now, where they try to pick out the most salacious or undermining stories within the Hindu mythology and pantheon as a way to exoticize it
Mm.
or to kind of show its inconsistencies and show that, haha, this is so ridiculous, right? Um, and the sad thing is, when we study our texts, there is a whole different approach. Um, the first thing is it always starts with an invocation. There's a certain mental attitude. I'm not saying this is not a slavish attitude. That's what the Western academics forget. They think that when you approach something with devotion or with a sense that there is something meaningful and sacred, they think you're going to be slavish and you're not going to question. And that is so wrong because the very fundamental point of the Upanishads is all about questioning. Is you can question anything, right? Literally. But it's a question of what is the intent behind that question? Are you questioning to understand, or are you questioning to just win an argument or, make your point, or kind of, are you trying to engage in vain dialectics in some sense?
Yeah.
So I really like what you're pointing out. I think the path to going for fiction is wonderful. I really wish you all the best. I think it's just heartening for someone from my generation to see your engagement with this. I think that's just such a breath of fresh air. I really wish you start your temple and that you find this. I'm very excited about this whole idea. I also have ideas of somehow ministering to our youth and their needs
Yeah.
in a way that's not catered to by our current temples and the
Yeah.
way it works. So maybe we'll find some common cause down the line. But so wonderful to hear what you're talking about.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I really hope so. I think there's just a huge gap in how people of my age who've, children of immigrants or immigrants themselves, it's so hard to feel connected to something. There's a scholar who does a good job here. So I'll borrow a quote. I think his name is Alf Hiltebeitel, and he's done some good ethnography of different communities, Hindu communities. And the quote that he has is, as scholars, we're tasked with distilling the essence of so much variety when variety itself is its essence. And I think that's a really beautiful way to think about what Hinduism is. And in my view, it is variety. It is not, there's no single path. There's no single way to do things. There's just variety. There's a lot of different religions locked up in it, and to have that intellectual spiritual freedom, wow, what a concept, because the monotheistic religions certainly don't in the same way as us. And it's funny what you said about dialectic and debate. That's such a key thing in it. The concept of asking questions, doubting doubting the existence of God himself, right? And there's such a long tradition of that. I think Judaism gets a lot of credit for that. Like when we talk about things in divinity school, they talk about Judaism as like a very dialectic religion. There's a lot of scholarly debate over the centuries. For some reason, Hinduism is not seen that way. When variety is its essence, when debate, doubt is its essence. Um, I'm very skeptical Hindu, and I think it's a very proud way to be a Hindu. But yeah, Nikil, I guess I'm curious as well. Like, what's your relation to it, and how? What does it mean in your life, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah, sure, sure. I mean, thank you both for sharing. I'm just sitting in awe here, just seeing you both talk about it. I know it means so much to both of you in different ways, so I'm just enjoying the show a little bit. But to myself, Hinduism is something that I wasn't super close to growing up, to be honest. I think I was close to it in the sense that, we would go to temple and I was practicing Hindu, but it felt somewhat restrictive, I would say. To your point, Abhijit, that there's no one set way, and yet I can point to so many cases of like, this is the way to do it, right?
Yeah,
This is what you're doing today. This is what you're doing tomorrow. This is what you do. This is the puja's got to be at 4 a.m., right? All that stuff. Um, so, but actually talking to Shankar several months ago was an introduction to me about how Hinduism is a bit more open. And Shankar, you talked about on a previous episode, we may not have transmitted that from generation to generation. And this idea of the modern version of Hinduism, which Abhijit you picked up on as well, is really interesting to me. I'm trying to unlearn and relearn a little bit between conversations with Shankar and you, Abhijit, and just trying to learn the history more. So, for example, Ganesh Chaturthi was earlier this week, right? And I was just looking up some of the history for myself, and I came across someone who wrote like a children's series, kind of like explaining the holiday, and they have many other books about different holidays. I thought it was fascinating, and I ordered the book. It's a children's book, but I just thought it's good to kind of engage with different ways of learning and engaging. So that's not something I would have done even 6 months ago, I think. But I'm trying to engage a little bit more with, hey, what are new ways of seeing things? What are different ways or different viewpoints around Hinduism, instead of just taking maybe what I saw growing up. And of course, I think my parents have also evolved their view of Hinduism. So that's also a piece of it, that another way for me to learn. But to answer your question, I think I really think about educating myself and trying to be as humble as I can and trying to see that variety that you were speaking to.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a very difficult thing. I feel like when you take a religion like that out of its natural habitat, you're sort of lost for, what are the things that I stick to call myself a Hindu. And so you choose like a few things that say like, these are the traditions I'm going to follow because, my mother's mothers did this stuff. And so, and then that's what you try to pass on to your kids, when realistically, if you're in India and the natural habitat of it, that variety is like not hard to find, right? It's like everywhere around you, so many different ways that people practice. It's a very different way to absorb and understand what that means compared to here. It's like, oh, let's go to the temple on Saturday, or let's do this for this one festival. It seems like it always feels like it comes out of nowhere, and you're just like, okay, I guess I'll do this. Like that's how it felt. I mean, I don't want to speak for you. That's how it felt to me growing up.
Yeah, me too, for sure.
I think that's something we have to work on as a community, right? It shouldn't feel like, oh, yeah, these are like, as long as I do these few things, I'm Hindu, and that's it. Like that shouldn't be it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Shankar, what do you think? I know you've thought about this a little bit too.
Oh, it's fascinating. I do agree with what Abhijit said, that growing up in that milieu informs your vocabulary and your way of thinking in a way that gives a lot of intuitive understanding of the philosophy when you read it, um, which I think the academic scholars here um, don't have access to. So when you take a book and you read it and contrast that with you're listening to this in the same truths in 1,000 different ways, from the way your grandfather talked, your father talked about, your uncle talked about it. You went to a local temple, you went to an aunt's house, and somebody said this. You went to a discourse. You attended a Bharatanatyam performance in which the dance was centered on this particular mythology, or you attended, a concert, a Carnatic concert in which they sang about this, right? Um, that rich immersion is very valuable. And I think it sort of makes it a little easier to make sense of all these threads, right? But at the root of it, while all that is important, ultimately, I feel that uh, every generation, every human being has to choose Hinduism for themselves. And that choice is really nothing other than a choice to know yourself. If you were to ask me what is that one essence in all the variety that you talked about, all that variety revolves around that one single question: is I want to know my true self.
Mm.
And if we can transmit that across the generations, your job is done. That's a very simple thing to transmit, right?
Mm.
And here is a way by which so many people have done this, right? So here's a very wide range of paths that you can choose to know your true self. How do you go about it? You can pick what you want, right? To me, that is sort of and that's something that will resonate with everyone, right? Who doesn't want to know about themselves truly,
Yeah, yeah.
right? And it also takes away the weight of, oh my God, I didn't live my 20 years in this part of the India or whatever like that, right? Anywhere you are, you can want to know yourself, and you can tap into that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I would. Um, Hopefully, that'll be the link that connects our generations and all generations, right? Right.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the link between generations, Abhijit, one thing we like to ask uh, people we interview is, what's the biggest thing you've learned from another generation?
Mm. Yes, I was thinking about this question today. Um, I think I would say the value of connection. I'll give that as the simple answer. I think my parents and people that I've grown up with of older generations have taught me the importance of connectedness within a family, connectedness within a community, um, owing something to other people, being owed, having these like tendrils that go out and touch other people, instead of feeling like your life is just your own, your problems are just your own. I think growing up here in this generation, there, all we receive really here are the uh, what's the word? The the messages. I would say the messages of staunch American individualism, and I I think no one culture has everything correct. But I think one of the beautiful things about being in between, like we are, is finding a way to meld that individualism with that sense of connectedness. And I don't think I appreciated that enough when I was a kid growing up. And now that I'm older, I definitely see that how much of that I've unconsciously absorbed from just hearing my parents talk and following their way of doing things.
That's beautiful. What a heartwarming way to look at it. I feel like growing up, I was trying to balance two cultures and trying to be accepted among my peers first bit, and I often ended up going one or the other. So I'm learning more and more since I've graduated from school to bring them together, right, and to integrate and, like you said, put those two together. But I don't think I'd quite thought about it like you just phrased it, in terms of that independence, autonomy on one side, and yet the beauty of the connection and the family on the other side, and like what happens when you can bring those two together. So it gets me excited.
Thank you.
That is beautiful. Wow, so mature and wise. Gosh, I don't think I'd figured that out at your age. So you're way ahead of the game.
I hope so. That would be nice.
Yeah. Now, Abhijit, we would love to contribute to a nonprofit organization you like as a thank you for your coming on to the podcast. So, if you name some place that you think we could all contribute and help, that'd be lovely. And it'll be our way of saying thank you, a big thank you. As our small way of saying a big thank you
Yeah,
for your coming on.
much appreciated. Can I say MannMukti? Is that all
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
You totally can.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Okay.
yeah, definitely. That would be helpful for sure for them.
Mhm.
Yeah, well, we're happy to. We will definitely make a contribution. We'll link MannMukti as well, in case any of our listeners want to learn about them or make their own donations as well. And then I did want to ask you, how can people find you if they want to learn more about you? You mentioned you have maybe a short story collection coming out, which I will be reading. I'm going to raise my hand right now, but yeah, how can folks get to know you?
Well, I'll definitely send you both the collection in its stage right now. I'd love your feedback and any thoughts you have. Yeah, I guess probably my personal website is the easiest place to go. It's abhijithr.com. And if not, I'm also very active on LinkedIn these days for work reasons. But all my other contact info is on my website, abhijithr.com.
Perfect. Yeah, that's a great note. We'll put that in the show notes as well, in case folks want to go there. Maybe just to wrap us up, I'd maybe like to hear from all three of us, just closing thoughts, anything you're taking away from the conversation. This has been such a rich exploration through so many topics. Yeah, does anyone want to kick us off?
You can go first, man.
Abhijit, you're our guest.
Oh, me. Okay. Yeah, well, definitely. Just want to say thanks to you guys for the conversation, for hearing me out. Yeah, I know I definitely got very emotional and vulnerable in there, and honestly feeling a lot better having gone through those emotions and talked to you guys about it. Just feeling really good coming out of this conversation, and that's definitely the best thing, is to turn a low emotion day into a better one. So I really appreciate your time and our connection, heart to heart here. Yeah, I would just say I hope if the podcast is about mental health, if it's about faith, whatever it may be, I hope there's I would like to say that if I can leave a message, it would be that storytelling, empathy, the connection that we can create through just better understanding of one another, where we are as opposed to where we think people need to be, is a legacy that I want to leave. Going back to the very first thing I said. So I hope that this does some small part in that.
Thanks for sharing
Thank you,
that.
Abhijit. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Shankar.
Oh, Nikil, why don't you go ahead? I'll close.
All right,
Bring us home. Yeah.
That's fair. That's fair. Abhijit, I just want to say thank you so much. I'm so struck by your authenticity and your vulnerability. Amazing gifts. It's beyond anything I could have even imagined coming into this conversation. It's lighting me up. You had me open up, I think, to go to deeper places than I thought I was gonna go in this conversation, which is the best feeling. It's funny, I was gonna make a little joke. I hope it's not distasteful, but I was gonna say, huh, some of his stuff got harder after he talked to me a few weeks ago. Oh shoot, I hope I didn't set him off on some course.
Oh, you're good.
No, yeah, I'm gonna tell myself it's coincidental, but
I
no,
think I started therapy after talking to you, like maybe like a day or two after. So
yeah,
yeah.
I think you mentioned that you were just about to start. Let the listeners know that I was not the cause of him going to therapy. I don't think, but um, but yeah, no, I just want to say, thank you for being so open and honest. I think you've opened my heart and mind in this conversation. I think you'll do the same with a lot of our listeners. And I'm so excited for your perspective on like what your writing is like, informed by this amazing person that we've had a chance to talk to. And then the other takeaway is just around Hinduism and learning more and learning from folks like both of you who frankly thought about the topic more than me, and kind of continuing to educate myself. So that is what I'm taking away.
I hope the writing doesn't come across as shitty now.
I'm sure it won't. I'm so sure it won't.
Yeah, thanks, Nikil. I echo a lot of that. I think Abhijit, coming into the conversation, I was all just admiration for the work you've done with MannMukti, and I think not just founding it, but also having the courage to step away and let someone else take it forward when you felt like the time was right, presumably. And I think that speaks a lot to your maturity as well. But none of that prepared me for how welcoming you were. It was like we walked into this sort of interview space, and you just opened the door and said, "Hey guys, come on in. Like this is sit on the bed. Let's have a cup of chai." Right? And didn't it feel like that? It was literally so. I felt very welcome, and I felt very comfortable to talk about many of these things, which are not easy topics, and in such a short time. So, really have to congratulate you. You have that gift. Um,
Thank you.
it's a very special gift, and on top of that, I was also very intrigued to talk to someone who has a master's of theology from Harvard. And you were talking about what you said. I did all the humdrum stuff, and I thought, well, if he thinks humdrum stuff is going and getting a master's from divinity school at Harvard, then this guy's something else, right? but and it was not just all that. You came away with a critical perspective of that experience, which I thought was fascinating and very rich conversation, emotionally satisfying, intellectually stimulating. I can't say enough. I'm just excited to see where all you take this, and just cheering you on. Thank you so much for joining us. I think you really made our day and made the podcast a lot more interesting.
No, much appreciated, guys. Really, really. Thank you.
Well, Shankar, that was a fantastic conversation. Anything you want to share or say as we wrap up?
Oh, definitely, Nikil. That was quite something. So much to unpack and ponder from that conversation. I thought it was really moving how Abhijit shared his personal motivation for founding MannMukti, and I found that very powerful. I did want to share a few thoughts about a difference I think I see in how our generations approach mental health. So, my generation's approach, broadly speaking, has been to be mindful of always having something like a resolution or a solution or an uplifting message or a ray of hope in the darkness when we share something publicly. On the other hand, I think your generation is more comfortable with sharing more personal experiences more freely and often unconstrained by that consideration. Um, and I'm just curious to hear your thoughts. How if you saw that, and also um, is overwhelm or something when we see a lot of that on social media something we need to worry about for the younger generation?
Yeah, it's a great observation, Shankar. I think you're right. Overwhelm can be a challenge for my generation and younger generations. But at the same time, I think there's something so important about the realness of conversations, right? Like sometimes, and we were talking about storytelling, right? With Abhijith and you and I, in my mind, a story doesn't necessarily have to have a positive end or even that ray at the end to brighten up the conversation. Of course, I think a lot of stories do have that already, but for some of those where it's not as clear or there's more of an uncertain ending or you're left kind of midway through the action, I still think there's a lot of value in that. And I actually think that's kind of what life is. So when I see that, I leave feeling with kind of inspired, um, inspired if a little bit subdued, versus what you mentioned and the desire, not even the desire, but the preference for having something positive to take away. I do think there's something in that I and my generation can learn from too, right? Because if you go too deep into it and you're only consuming things that are uncertain or
Right.
anxiety inducing or whatever it might be, then does that change our beliefs about what we can actually do and achieve?
Right. I think that's a good point. And I think probably a lot of my exposure has been to sort of stories like that, particularly in our mythology, or that there's always a resolution, an uplifting resolution of some sort. But it's also true that a lot of modern literature is not like that, and it's often unresolved. It may not even be chronological, magic realism, stuff like that. So I yeah, I mean, I think it's just different levels of maybe maturity or perspectives in how we absorb that, right? Is something that's interesting. And of course, our dear listeners, you can reach out to us on our Instagram page, Chai Across Generations, or our email, chaiacrossgenerations@gmail.com. You can also subscribe to us on YouTube.
As always, subscribe to our podcast and the new YouTube channel. Please leave us a rating or review on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. This really, really helps new people find our show. And we really want to thank you all for listening.
See you all next time.